So yesterday was Sister Nivedita's birthday, and we happened to go to Dungannon, and some of you were there on the Sunday to celebrate her birthday in the place where she was born. So we happened to say that, and other people have said it, that for us, of course, Dungannon is holy ground and is a pilgrimage place for those people interested in, first of all, Swami Vivekananda's legacy as seen, understood, and protracted through the life and teachings of and example of Sister Nivedita, Margaret Elizabeth Nobel, born in 1867 in Dungannon, 28th October. And so a few things were highlighted, and we, as a guideline, I went through the poem Celtic Lioness, and so we simply repeat many of the things with elaborations that were said, going through her life verse by verse with this poem Celtic Lioness. First of all, Sister Nivedita, Celtic Lioness. Why is such a title there? Because Swami Vivekananda had said, what we need is not a man, but a woman, a Celtic, he didn't say Celtic, a lioness, a very veritable lioness. But later on, of course, he's encouraging her to go to India in a letter after about 3 years of meeting each other. And he mentions all the things necessary for a life in India, but pertaining to her. And this was listed by virtues ranging from the education she had, the sincere love that she had, all of these attributes, but above all, your Celtic blood. What does that mean? So it was understood to mean, we have to find out or understand the context that Swami Vivekananda put on different countries. He felt that different regions, just as we have different personalities, were foundations, as it were, genetic foundations for certain characteristics. So, for example, India's blood, spirituality is deeply written in India's blood. The Greek culture was said to be, in his view, the cradle of Western civilization that was highlighting the aesthetics, science, culture of that kind. India also had science, of course, that was passed to the West. For example, a numerical system already comes from India. Our decimal system comes from India. And all of that comes through the Arab culture, borrowed from India, and becomes part and parcel of technical and scientific thought in the West through the Islamic influence. But you see, born in Dungannon, of an Irish Scots family, born not as a Catholic, as many people would think, but born as a Methodist. What does that mean? John Wesley, a Wesleyan, John Wesley was a person who began as a Church of England, and he felt that there was nothing much genuine in the churches. They were reserved for nobility and so on, and he didn't find much religion or God in these churches, and he thought, if I want to preach the message of Christ, I have to go to the agricultural areas and the industrial areas. And so the western part of England is dotted with Methodist churches where the coal mines were. Teaching in the open fields and so on, a kind of revolutionary attitude that was orientated toward the common people. In this background, Margaret Elizabeth Nobel was born in this beautiful place in County Tyrone. So her parents were devout Scots-Irish parents, and there's no doubt Dungannon for us is picturesque, but is also sacred because of her presence. Her birth certificate pinpoints the family address at 23B Scotch Street. There's a plaque on Scotch Street, largely due to Maurice Hayes, former senator, who then puts up a plaque from the Ulster Historical Society on the street on which she was born, because we don't know where the house was. It was Scotch Street. And so typically when we take guests up to Dungannon, we take them to a certain charity for women's education called First Steps for Women. And we take them up to the visitor center, and we take them down to the blue plaque, and we all go home. Now you see what happened. Samuel Noble, her father, was inspired by the ideals of ministry and missionary work, I suppose, to go and study for being a member of the clergy in the Methodist Church. He went to England, he went to Manchester to enroll as a student of theology. And so Margaret Noble was actually left behind and in the care of his mother, Margaret Elizabeth Nobel, after whom she also had been named Margaret. In fact, in later life, when she goes and writes under a pseudonym, she uses this term Nelius. And her mother was Mary Isabel Hamilton, again a very common, we say common, maybe popular, Scots name, and Noble also a Scots name. And so he goes and becomes a minister there, and that means then that she joins him much later and meets her sister for the first time there in England. And Samuel Noble, her father, has an untimely death. And so when she was about 9 or 10, he's there in Torrington, Devon, there because of his health. And so it cuts short, really, the Noble family reunion, which is there. And she then returns to her parents in Ireland. But she finishes her schooling at Halifax College. And during those years, she will become deeply influenced by some nationalist ideas stemming from Ireland that belonged probably to her maternal grandfather, who really was interested in promoting Ireland's home rule at the time and that movement. And so we can see the childhood influences which are going on there for her future work. Not only that, but her mother revealed to Josephine MacLeod that when Margaret Elizabeth was born, she was dedicated actually to God and the spiritual life. That way. Anyway, she graduated from Halifax College as a school teacher, and not just a school teacher, but she had these revolutionary ideas. And don't forget, Halifax College was also a Congregationalist college. All the missionaries in Africa, David Livingstone, Moffat, and so on, Robert Moffat, they were all from the Congregationists who were revolutionaries in the sense that they were anti-slavery, they were instrumental in the abolishment of slavery, and they were also there for equal voting rights for women. But at Wrexham in England, she began working in earnest for the poor and the marginalized there. So already there was a social aspect to her character. And then also she started publishing her own writing. She did it under various assumed names. By the time she was really 25, She was a well-known author and having her own school as well, with ideas, pioneering ideas from the educators, Johann Pestalozzi, Frederick Freebull. These were revolutionaries in education, bringing new ideas that leads us in the end, Swami Vivekananda and Sister Nivedita, for understanding all knowledge is in us. It just has to be drawn out. So she gained a reputation anyway for delivering lectures on a regular basis at something called the Sunday Club and also the Liverpool Science Club. And in London, she co-founded what was called the Sesame Club. Now we know 3 prominent people who were members of this club, and 2 of them are Irish people. One was George Bernard Shaw, and the other one was W.B. Yeats. And as you may or may not know, Yeats was instrumental in not interpreting, but translating Upanishads, or at least some of the Upanishads. And so W.B. Yeats, so well known in Ireland, such a beautiful, prolific poet, was very much influenced by this kind of Eastern revolutionary thought and was great friends with Rabindranath Tagore. I think they had a fallout at some point. But you can see the bent of his mind. And the other great giant was Thomas Huxley, that was Darwin's bulldog. So you can see the Sesame Club was the cream of the intelligentsia in London. And you can see at the mere age of 20, 25, something like that, she was a prolific writer and an intellectual, moving in intellectual circles, who were all passionate champions of progressive thought. So here we find a character who is entirely individual, a character who has leadership qualities, somebody who is interested in genuinely helping people, particularly the underprivileged, somebody with a tremendous active social conscience, and somebody who was an educator, therefore, and somebody who was a prolific writer, somebody who wrote beautifully in those days. And so these very productive, formative years of her life was also a time when she experienced a crisis of faith. And she would describe this crisis in this way. During the 7 years of wavering, she says, it occurred to me that in the study of natural science, I would surely find the truth I was seeking. So I ardently began to study how this world was created and all things in it and the laws of nature. At least there was consistency. But it made the doctrines of the Christian religion seem all the more inconsistent, what she'd been growing up with. And just then, she happened to stumble, I suppose, if there's such a thing, on the life of Buddha. So for the next 3 years, she plunged into the study of the religion of Buddha and became more and more convinced that the salvation he preached was decidedly more consistent with the truth than the preachings of the Christian religion that she had grown up with. And so the turning point, really, of her life and of her faith, really, was a meeting, because she first met Swami Vivekananda on a cold November evening in 1895. She was an invitee from a lady, Isabel Margason, who held a meeting in her drawing room. And the scene is this oriental man, Swami Vivekananda, sitting there with his back to the fire and a semicircle of devotees all around. And she records that none of them were that impressed with what he had to say, because they already had these ideas from the Transcendentalist movement in America, Emerson, and so on and so forth. All of these ideas were already there. But what struck her personally, this Margaret Noble, was his character, was the fact that his words were not empty words. They were charged with some kind of energy that impressed her deeply. And over the weeks, she was able to reflect on these words and find that maybe she and others had taken a cursory view of them, and I'm suspecting an intellectual view, rather than somebody who was experiencing what he was saying. And so she took the opportunity to see him on the other two occasions when he was speaking. He was actually invited, of course, to England after his success, Swami Vivekananda's success at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago, as we know. And so he was in decidedly British surroundings there in the West End living room, and invited, of course, by devotees in England. She remembered his talk anyway vividly. Even 10 years later, she remembered exactly the content of what he had said. And so she starts rallying around to his cause. What's his cause? He wants to uplift the beloved people of his country who had been deprived of education, wealth, standards of living. After 1,000 years of conquest, continuous conquest, the British Raj was there. And Swami Vivekananda, as we know, went throughout the length and breadth of India and wept bitterly to see the plight of his fellow countrymen and the condition of India. And of course, what was this India? The cradle of spiritual civilization. So that when India is free, as it were, then it means the whole world is open now as a recipient of this universalizing, saving philosophy called Vedanta. That is more a philosophy than a religion. But if you want to classify it as a religion, it's a practical religion. So anyway, I'm going to read out the poem that was written and comment as we go. She had from early childhood days an inner urge to serve the poor and coax young minds towards the best. New thoughts to schools she did apply. Desire for deeper truth did draw an Eastern master in strange guise. In refined ladies' drawing room, he too did coax the seeking minds. Then, of course, she went to study, so more study still to firm belief. That's how we always do it. We study a little bit, and then we enter into the teachings deeply until it touches the heart and becomes the motivating factor in our life. Practical Vedanta. So more study still to firm belief. His words were called to greater life. She was inspired to fulfill his mission. She really wanted to go to India. And for 3 years or so, from her meeting, she decided that she was an activist, that she would rally round funds for his mission in India. And he wasn't keen on her going to India in the beginning. And so Margaret, as she was then, began exchanging letters with the Swami, initially assisting with the Vedanta Center's work that he had established in England already. And when the centers closed in 1897, that was 2 years or so after meeting him, she continued organizing things like discussions and teaching sessions in an unofficial capacity and helped to raise famine relief funds on behalf of the Ramakrishna mission that Vivekananda had already established there in India. But through it all, her heart was set up upon coming to India. And in a letter written in July 23rd, the Swami wrote, "You can do more work for us from England than by coming here. Lord bless you for your great self-sacrifice for the poor Indians." There was no intention at that point of her going to India. And so she was very, very disappointed by this, and her eagerness to go there caught the eyes of Sanskrit scholar E.T. Sturdy and theosophist Henrietta Muller, both of whom were devotees of Swami Vivekananda, and they wrote to him. And in a few days, this letter that she'd been waiting for so long was received. Let me tell you frankly, he says in this letter, that I'm now convinced that you have a great future in the work for India. What was wanted was not a man but a woman, a real lioness to work for the Indians, women especially. Your education, sincerity, purity, immense love, determination, and above all, your Celtic blood make you the woman wanted. So what is special about the Celtic blood that he saw in her was a woman so forthright, so bold, with the same kind of energy of Queen Boadicea, who was, by the way, quite popular in Victorian England at that time, representing a kind of romantic view of a feisty woman who was full of courage against the Romans way back. And so this idea caught on. But there's no doubt, you see, that the Celtic people have this internal feistiness, this strength, this courage amongst men and women, both. And so there was no looking back. On an icy January morning, she boarded the ship, SS Mombasa. In those days, it was steam and also sail, both. And they didn't have the ballast that we have today in modern shipping. So a rocky journey. Those who've ever ventured along, in the Bay of Biscay will probably suffer from seasickness straight away. And she started her long voyage with an element of kind of apprehension. So she says, she acknowledges in a writing that she was a little apprehensive going to this foreign land. What Calcutta will feel like, I tremble to think, she says, in a diary entry. Perhaps her heart's misgivings were calmed, of course, on January 8th when she landed, and there was Swami Vivekananda waiting to meet her, receiving her at the docks. So she was put up in a neighborhood in Park Street. That was her first home in Calcutta. And of course, it's all new experience. And so she describes it, drawing out the doors and so on and so forth in the letter. But Swami Vivekananda had warned her about her work. First of all, the British will think that you are a sellout. They won't have much regard for you, hobnobbing with Indians. And the Indians will think you're a dirty foreigner, mlecha. Anyway, if you like, come. So shortly after her arrival, having visited some places, for example, Dakshinaswar, she visited, very memorable visit she had. And she also met women disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, such as Yogin Ma, Agoramai Devi, Gopal Ma, same person. For worshipping Ramakrishna as the embodiment of Gopal, you imagine. You can read her life, by the way, in an excellent book. 2 books are there by Swami Chetananda. God lived with them, they lived with God. There you'll find her life, and all of their lives will be there. So she was touched by their warm welcome. And don't forget, it's a very, very delicate situation. No language was necessary to express the readiness of these Eastern women, she recalls, to meet, love lovingly and trustfully halfway. Only in some such fashion as this can the real genius of the Indian people be gauged. Let the occasion be religious, all barriers be broken down high and low, men and women, kindred and alien, all are one because all realize so intensely, like Gopal's mother, the common devotion that has drawn them together. Now Swami Vivekananda brought two other ladies. He called them the Trinity, Josephine MacLeod and Sarah Bull, who was married to the great violinist Ole Bull, a Norwegian violinist. And these three women he called the Holy Trinity, Nivedita, Josephine MacLeod, and Sarah Bull. And so by the, of course, landing in January, she started taking some Bengali lessons and familiarizing herself with the area and things like that. But by the summer, things are starting to get hot. Vivekananda takes them up to the mountains, to the Himalayas, for two reasons. Firstly, he wants to introduce her to this real Indian heritage, the culture of meditation, the rishis in the mountains. And secondly, of course, he wants to take her away and deepen her teachings and understandings by bringing her into contact with the mystical side of this Vedanta. Even before that, a remarkable thing happened on March 17th. This is 1898 we're talking about. She would meet Sharada Devi for the first time, breaking centuries of Brahminical taboos. Sharada Devi, an Orthodox widow, shares her food with the foreign visitors. And this was a gesture that threw the doors of Orthodox Hindu society wide open. And a day of days, she would write in her diary. And in a letter to Swami Ramakrishnananda, Vivekananda exclaimed, Shri Mother is here, and the European and American ladies went the other day to see her. And what do you think? The mother even ate with them. Is not that grand, he says. Sharada Devi, Divine Holy Mother, her simple gesture gave us all a dignity and made my future work possible in a way nothing else could have done. This is Margaret writing to a friend, Nell Hammond. And there we find the photos of Nivedita and Holy Mother there, sitting side by side together, and her addressing fondly all her life now, Sister Nivedita as, or she's still Margaret Nobel at this point, as Kuki. That means my little child, affectionately for her, and so insightful into Nivedita's character. It was on March 25th that Swami Vivekananda initiated her in the order of the Ramakrishna, giving her the oath of brahmacharya, renaming her at that point now Nivedita, so aptly the dedicated one, dedicated to God, but dedicated to the country, to the people, to his ideals, to the message. Dedicated to Ramakrishna Vivekananda. And then days that followed, he christened them all, that is the Josephine and Sarah, Nivedita, all of them, he referred to them as the Trinity. He was telling them stories, of course, of India's past, familiarizing them with the folklore, familiarizing with the deep concepts of India, the cultural heritage that was there. As I say before, summer fell, and he takes them up to the mountains. It is here that there's a bittersweet moment for Nivedita. The affectionate, kind Guru seemed very distant, and they had constant arguments because she still thought that British colonialism in India was a good thing for India. And Vivekananda had to completely oppose that and adjust her thinking on it. And he did it so successfully that she was so in favor of actively promoting the ancient culture of India against the British Raj in the future. But it was a difficult time. So, along with the vivid experience of India's farming heartland and its people, and Vivekananda enthusiastically telling them of the glories of the Rajputanas and also the Indian pantheon and so on. But her loyalty to the English nation and her initial inability to see the British rule of India for what it was, it led to some angry dialogues, debates, and exchanges. And she says, I had been little prepared for a constant rebuke and attack upon all my cherished prepossessions. I saw the dream of a friendly and beloved leader falling away from me, and the picture of one who would be at least indifferent and possibly silently hostile, substituting itself instead. But you see, it was these exchanges that greatly influenced her worldview, and she would soon grow into one of the most vocal critics, of course, of the British Empire. And the conflict ended with Vivekananda blessing Nivedita in a moment of wonderful sweetness and reconciliation. And don't forget, in that environment, the environment of the Himalayas, Almora and so on, he really was in his spiritual mood, a mood of isolation, silence, which was interpreted as a kind of coldness. She later writes about this, but such a moment can heal a wound. It cannot restore an illusion broken into fragments. And I understood for the first time, she says, that the greatest teachers may destroy in us a personal relation only in order to bestow an imperial vision in its place. Anyway, the travelers from there proceed to Kashmir, and there at Amarnath, Sister Nivedita witnesses Swami Vivekananda having a divine vision. What a wonderful time and opportunity being with this great master, this great teacher. As I look back, she writes, on this wonderful summer, I wonder how I have come to heights so rare. We have been living and breathing in the sunshine of the great religious ideals of these months, and God has been more real to us than common men. And so we find developing this real lioness that Swami Vivekananda is now referring to. Because after this trip to the mountains, she plunges herself into serious work. And over the next few years, she labors tirelessly for women's education, relief work, lecture tours across the whole of India, fundraising for the Indian cause abroad, putting to use every single waking minute. And she does that for the rest of her life. She does it to transform herself into, in the Swami's words, the woman wanted for India. And so that by November of this year, the year of her arrival, she moves into eventually what we know now as 16 Bospora Lane. It is now a museum, a national museum. And there she would live until May of the following year. And she begins then writing Kali the Mother. And actually later in her life, in order to raise funds towards the eve of her life, she is finishing off 3 books, and the money that she's raising from these books is going to her schools. Anyway, in this premises, there's a courtyard that has become the school, the classrooms 4 Orthodox Hindu girls. And of course, that is now a heritage museum. In her book, Studies from an Eastern Home, she describes the house vividly, and this is an insight into her nature. She says, a rambling specimen of the true old Hindu style of building. In the whole place, there is not an inch of glass. The lower casements are protected by iron and the upper by wooden bars, and so while the sunlight outside my little study is softened by mats made of dark green splints, my bedroom is always open to the stars. It gives us an insight into not only her thinking, but her delight in environments that maybe other people would not find so romantic. Anyway, November 13th, that year, she opens her school. It's attended by Swami Vivekananda, by his brother disciples, above all by Holy Mother Sharada Devi. And she herself performs the inaugural puja and blesses the school. And one of the school's early students was to later, of course, become the first president of the Sri Sharada Math. Swami Vivekananda had always wanted that there be an institute, a monastic institute for women, for nuns. And at one point he even sits there across the bank, points in the direction of Dakshinaswar, and marks it out as the place where this will be, and this is where that mother house is today. And so from the very beginning, you'll find it was Nivedita's aim to give a uniquely Indian identity to women's education. Remember her difference of opinion in the mountains. It's now come full circle, and she's now wants to instill in the women's education the particular Indian identity, not Western identity, in this education. Remember, she was an educationist inspired by German educational thinkers, state-of-the-art thinkers, who were keen to unfold young minds rather than stifle them, as the more traditional education would do. She said, we don't want pale imitations of America or American or English women. We want, on the contrary, a womanhood that can contribute something to the circle. And alongside regular classes, she held teacher training sessions with progressive Indian women from the Brahmo Samaj. They included Sarala Gosal. Sarala Gosal was a tremendous educationist in her own right, making huge institutions all over India for women's education, an eminent educator. And then, of course, we see that in February, we're now talking of 1899, Vivekananda arranges for her to speak on Kali worship. She speaks at a place called the Albert Hall. It's not the Albert Hall in London. And Nivedita would prepare her notes, take them to the Swami, and he would then help her with what she calls the solid parts. And the talk was a great success because she was a wonderful orator, even though she didn't rate herself so much in this way. And more than that, she delivers a second lecture at the Kali Ghat temple. Kolkata is orientated around the Kali Ghat temple. And it's a great pilgrimage place for people to go there. And he was aware that the lecture on the goddess by a foreigner at the religious heart of Kolkata might cause a lot of controversy, but to her surprise, and maybe his certainty, he was much pleased with it. He thinks, she writes, that would be the greatest blow that could be struck against exclusiveness. She writes this to Josephine MacLeod. And then, of course, standing in the courtyard of 16 Bospora Lane, he tells Sister Nivedita for the first time about his own realization of Kali that took place in his life. And as we know, Swami Vivekananda was all about Kali. Of course, even Kali is strange to many South Indians and was very strange to the colonialists, putting an element of their own interpretation, thinking that it was backward, that it was thoroughly pagan, and so on. And so, for this reason, I think he encourages her to speak on Kali. Now, by March 1899, of course, he points out this river, which is there over the river, this place in Dakshinaswar where the future Sharada Math is going to be. In terms of her initiation as a brahmachari, she says that I fancy he made me brahmacharini for life, partly for the sake of reviving the old order of it, and partly because I'm not really ready for anything higher in his eyes. But of course, there's another reason for it, really, and that is that in later life, once Swami Vivekananda has passed away in 1902, she is inspired really towards the national cause. And she cannot do it in any political way as part of the Ramakrishna order. Had she been ordained into sannyas, it would not have been possible. And this was her great mission in life. In her view, carrying on really the work of Swami Vivekananda with this understanding, we cannot spread this universal message if India is bound by the shackles. So we can continue with the poem and you'll understand what I mean. In Eastern place, with keenness fresh, she learned and loved the curious ways, the sights and sounds of simple life. He took hold of her in Holy Land. With blessings from Mother Divine and Master's guiding, wakening light, she entered sacred inner cave of subtle heart and God profound, whisper in the mountains. Now dedicated life toward her task, she sought to serve where'er she could, to raise Shakti in young and old, and so restore great nations past. I'll make a comment there. She, of course, designed the first Indian national flag. It wasn't used except at the first Congress. And this was Didachi's symbol, this lightning rods, if you like, this great Vraja, this weapon of the thunderbolt. So, of course, it wasn't all plain sailing, as it were, because the school ran out of funds. She had to go back to the West. She did it with Swami Vivekananda and Swami Turiyananda. It was during this period of time that she really, really intimately understood Swami Vivekananda's vision. Every day was an exposition of an inspired thought, coming like a flash of lightning all the time. And in later life, of course, based on her knowledge of him, she alone writes his biography, The Master as I Saw Him. Nobody else had the boldness to do it. If he was seen, that is Swami Vivekananda, as Lion King, then she was daughter Lioness, a brilliant fire that warmly shone on faces of the yearning young. When God is seen in ragged dress and plague and famine roam the streets, worship him hands, heart and soul, and heal his sores, soothe her distress. It wasn't long before a plague, a famine broke out. And Swami Vivekananda, his whole ideal was monks should be people who lead the way. And so she was there making the courtyard of Bospara Lane, the school, the headquarters for famine, for plague relief, instituting things that we now found useful in COVID times to do with health and hygiene, sweeping the streets herself and also foregoing nourishment so that she could assist in this financially and otherwise. Anyway, she has to go back then to the West. She does that. She unites with her family, and she goes back with Swami Vivekananda, as I say, because the school has no funds. Her idea is then to go quickly to America and do some lectures to raise funds for her school. And so that was what she was doing, speaking on many, many different topics. And there, of course, she goes for the first time to Ridgely Manor in New York. And that she sees as a great turning point in her life. Ridgely Manor is now a branch center of a retreat center, actually, in America, in New York State. So there she says, turning point. Vivekananda blesses her, blesses Sarah Bull, and the Swami's words are significant. He says, all that Ramakrishna Paramahansa gave to me, women's hands will be the best anyway to hold what came from a woman, from mother. He's referring to Kali. Who and what she is, I do not know. I have never seen her, but Ramakrishna Paramahansa, he saw her. She may be a great disembodied spirit for all I know. Anyway, I cast the load on you. And in the very same month, she finishes her book, Kali the Mother. Beautiful book on Kali, authentic exposition of the nature of Kali. She goes to Chicago. She meets the Hale sisters who hosted Swami Vivekananda in Chicago so beautifully. And she's enamored with the character that they have there. She also happens to go to Paris in 1900. She meets Patrick Geddes. Patrick Geddes was a great Scottish biologist, sociologist, pioneering town planning person. And he writes his sociological method in history, and she influences him, or he influences her, she says, in dealing with things in India. At the end of that period of time, she actually goes to France, and she goes there with Sarah Bull, and she's joined there by the Swami. She goes to a place called Perrault Gourec, I think, village, if I pronounce it correctly. And that is where Swami Vivekananda gives her this beautiful benediction. Be thou to India's future son, the mistress, servant, friend in one. It's a beautiful benediction she gives. And it was in London also, going back there, that she meets her lifelong friend, the great genius, really, Jagadish Chandra Bose, the polymath, who is not only a biophysicist, but also contributed toward the discovery of wireless radio and many, many things like that. Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, as he became, she championed him. She wrote most of his papers. And when she next visited Ireland, which was in 1908, visiting her family in Strabane and other places, she comes here and she is there entrenched in Dublin City, living there with Jagadish Chandra Bose and his wife, writing his scientific papers for him that is presented to the Royal Society. And so then, of course, she has to hasten back to India. And there she starts her work again in Bosborough Lane, enrolling women from every strata of society, cutting across lines of castes. And of course, unfortunately, 1902, July, her great guru, who she loved so much, passes away. And this, she has a heart-wrenching entry in her diary, simply says, Swami died. In her book, The Master as I Saw Him, she describes their last meeting. She says, on Wednesday of the same week, the day before Ekadashi, and himself keeping the fast in all strictness, he insisted on serving the morning meal to the same disciple, that is herself. And finally, to end the meal, he himself poured the water over the hands, my hands, of course, she's writing, and dries them with a towel. It is I who should do these things for you, Swamiji, she says, not you for me. But his answer was startling in its solemnity. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. Something checked the answer, but that was the last time. And as it rose to the lips and the words remained unuttered, this was well, for here also the last time had come. She was so heart-sore about his passing. She wished, may I just have a piece of cloth as a memento. And there at the funeral pyre, as the body is being cremated, there a piece of cloth drifts away from the ashes and lands on her lap. With the passing anyway of Swami Vivekananda, her life too has reached a kind of crossroads. And the activities now form the next stage of her life, up until her demise in 1911, a mere 44 years of life, having given everything she possibly could to India. And there we see so many tributes to her from all the people whose lives she influenced, representing really the whole of the Indian nation. It was said very much so that of all the foreigners who loved India, Sister Nivedita stands foremost. Her life was one long dedication to the country's cause, and today her name is synonymous with love and selfless service to India. So this is some of the things that were said about her. The earth's bravest and best will have to sacrifice themselves for the good of many, for the welfare of all. Buddhas by the hundreds are necessary with eternal love and pity. This is what Swami Vivekananda writes to her in a letter dated June 7th in 1896 already. And of course, it was words like that that moved her in the first place to join him and do this great work. But this work was not just in terms of education, and because now she was actively supporting the freedom movement in various ways, she had to dissociate from the Ramakrishna order because they had the ethos, they won't get involved in politics. And already she was under the scrutiny of the British government, who was censoring her letters. By 1902, she had written to Josephine, "I've received a warning that the police have taken authority to open my letters, and I don't care to write to you for their eyes." After so we have requested to inform the public was the announcement that went out, both on behalf of the Ramakrishna order, but she maintained close connections and vice versa with her beloved Swamis, Swami Purnananda and so on, kept close to her. When she was ill, they went and nursed her as well. Then, of course, in speaking publicly, her audience included students, included scholars, members of the judiciary, ladies' clubs, resident associations. She was highly critical of Lord Curzon at the partition of Bengal. And so my poem continues. It goes like this. When God is seen in ragged dress, care not for dirt, disease, and death, or cutting racial scorn that hurts. 1,000 years of heel on head have first forced our mother unto this, the Mother India. But Kali black is same mother, whose frantic limbs announce the dawn, whose mother and lolling tongue devour, whose cry is Vande Mataram, the well-known freedom song. And she encouraged her students to sing this song. Then be mad with desperate love for sacred soil of sacred land, where saints and sages did abound. Strong rulers wise defend it well. Is the antiquity of culture dead, where art and science made a home, and Indian eyes see newborn truths as much as Athens, Crete, or Rome? The Indian heritage, we only think of the Western heritage. Even now, you would swear there was no history in China or in India. Take courage from a Celtic band, whose gift unfolds a strength well hid. Empress Queen can reign from far, as Queen Victoria, but victory not when lords oppress. Not only was she highly critical of the British Raj and their unfairness, but she, on the other hand, was encouraging people like Rabindranath Tagore, like the various artists of the day. She influenced Indian art to bring back. She visited Ellora and Ajanta and insisted that artists visit those places in order to get a glimpse of what the original Indian art was like. Tamil poet and independence activist Subramanya Bharati met Nivedita around the time of, let's say, 1906. That was the Calcutta session of the Congress. And she impressed on him the importance of women's emancipation in the context of the independence movement. According to Bharati's wife, Nivedita asked, if half the nation was enslaved, how could the other half hope to win freedom? And here we find direct echoes of Swami Vivekananda's sentiment on the upliftment of women. She was supporting eventually the Swadeshi movement, but by 1905 she was inflicted by serious illness. She had a severe bout of meningitis, and when Sharada Devi came to see her, she says of Sharada Devi, I never saw a face so full of life, or so full of love, I should say. And she writes this to Josephine MacLeod. She goes back, of course, to take rest, and she sees her sisters and what have you. It was on that trip then that she completes the master as I saw him. She says in 1907 already, function of art in shaping nationality. She writes that. It's published in the Modern Review. It would be the first of many articles she would write that would profoundly influence the Indian art movement and promote its pioneers, Abanindranath Tagore, Nandalal Bose, Asit Halder, and others. Look at the wide range of influence that she had. Anyway, by 1908, she finds herself in this region, that is in Dublin even, in 1908. And eventually, of course, she goes back to complete her work, having met significant people. For example, she had an interview with the acclaimed Russian anarchist philosopher Peter Kropotkin, and he had encouraging words for India. Courage, my friends, courage. In no case can freedom be long delayed. Anyway, she remains in England before she returns to India. And then while in England, of course, she manages to be with her mother in her last moments. But on her return, once again, she becomes active. She takes charge of the school. And although she was happy to be back, there were difficulties ahead. She couldn't meet the rising school's expenses. And so she responded in the only way she knew, cutting down on her own needs. Her appeals for funds were unsuccessful, and 2 small branch schools had to be shut down. And the one who was helping her, Sister Sudhira, she was a pillar of support in this difficult time. She was concerned more than about her own fate, about having enough funds to ensure that the work had to be, that she had taken on continued after her demise, because she had a premonition, and that is, my wonderful 12 years is drawing to a close. I have still 2 years left, but no more. And sure enough, in 1911, she passes away. But even before that, in that same year, she's there with beloved Sarah Bull, who she loved so much. And although Vivekananda called her Dira Mata, she had been a lifelong supporter and financier, and she passed away. But Nivedita was at her side until the end. On her return to India, she suffered the loss of cherished associates, Swami Sadhananda, who had supported her so much, Swami Ramakrishnananda, the direct disciple of Ramakrishna, and then also those who are supporting her in the school, Sister Christine and Sudhira. They left the school also around this time. She was disappointed by this, but they would return later to carry on the work. But they themselves were never to see Sister Nivedita again. She left ultimately for Darjeeling for her health, the mountains, and there she stayed, and she managed to complete 3 books going on at the same time, so that the royalties will be given to her schools. She made a will out ensuring that that would happen. And so this is the life and ultimate death, the boat that sank, Sister Nivedita, and we conclude with the remnant of the poem. Now staying cool of mountain air, you gave your all without a rest. Your body spent and made its mark. Your words inspired the best of men. The children sing of fetters gone, viceroy shamed, and you have won the eternal prize of timeless peace, to meet with joy Gadai Naran. His word came forth, let Bharat rise. In 5 decades the shackles snapped. Now teach the world all paths are true. No need to hate when oneness is. My reference to shackles is this. You see, it only took 5 decades, 50 years after Ramakrishna, for Indian independence, political freedom. And so when you ask, and I made this remark on Sunday, what was behind this freedom, the largest democracy in the world, ultimately, it came from Ramakrishna, his birth. That's the power that he had. And without that, how can we spread this universal message of Vedanta? That is really the only way where we can put some common sense into mankind. By teaching a unity of existence, we then have the panacea for all the wars going on, all the selfishness going on, all the egocentric positions that result in all of these, even all the religious fights that have gone on historically. It will only come when we understand the unity of our own existence, that there is only oneness. So with that we can conclude. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks. And happy birthday, Sister Nivedita.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Good, good.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.